Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. We want to talk a little bit today about our friends over at the Federal Reserve. We think they're up to mischief, and yet the markets love them. Markets love them, especially today. And they have shown that they can pull the country and rescue the country. Stocks are skyrocketing. And guess what else is skyrocketing? The money supply. So the money supply sometimes helps people. I guess if you and I had $1 million dropped on our lap today, Chris, we'd feel very rich. It doesn't mean that that money in a year or two from now is going to be worth a whole lot. But the printing of money does stimulate a lot of things over time. It stimulates the price of gold. But when the stocks rise, everybody rushes. It's sort of like a panic into it, a rush to just spend, and people are accepting the fact that the Fed is indeed involved in rigging the stock prices of stock markets. And all they have to do is promise that interest rates will be low, we're going to print the money, and it opens up the doors to as much debt as one wants. So the psychology is there, and psychology is important of the anticipation, because in reality there are still a lot of problems out there. But you know, the unemployment statistics, they're reading them as they're perfect, but long term they're not so perfect as they believe. This is a day-to-day activity on reflection and reaction to what the policies are. And right now there's a lot, excuse me, a lot of enthusiasm for what's going on. But the market is saying that things are okay now, and it looks like a few people are getting back to work. But quite frankly, if you look at the charts, we live in historic times when it comes to manipulation of money. If you look back at the amount of money the Fed was holding in its deposits, it was less than $1 trillion, $870 billion, and now it's up over $7 trillion, and that shows that money was created out of thin air. In the chart we want to put up right now, Chris, we want to talk about is what happens you know, when the Fed prints a lot of money. And this chart shows that this is the money supply. See, it ambled along there for a good many years, even in spite of the recessions, even in spite of the correction at the dot-com bubble bursting, and even in 08, 09, you see blips upwards. But look at what's happening now. So this means the anticipation was really huge, and the psychology has changed. And this has not been resolved yet, because you know, even today they're asking for more spending. More spending, it's not more taxes, it's an indirect tax, it's going to be an inflation tax, but this is more inflation, and it reassures the stock market people, and yet the correction will have to come. And that's what we fear and we should deal with, because you can't do this forever. You just can't print money forever, promise everybody the sky's the limit. And in many ways it's looking at a magician. You know, can a magician always pull another rabbit out of the hat? And you know, today they say, well, they sure pulled a big one out today, and yet this will not work. The magicians can get caught up in their tricks, and they can realize that it is not the way to permanent wealth. And that's what we're dealing with. There's a bit of deception going on, but the whole problem is spending is growing, debt is growing, inflation is growing, the inflation of the money supply. We have not yet seen the consequence of all this printing of money, and it will come. So just as people get excited about you know, the stock market going up again, I think it's an illusion, and it's deceiving. It's delusional that they think that they can continue to do this forever. So we'll want to keep an eye on this, Chris, obviously, because it's very, very important. But I think we're going to hear and see some fireworks pretty soon in the marketplace that will have to demand some corrections.
That's right, Dr. Paul, and that chart is stunning, because it encompasses most of my life, and it just shows that we are in unprecedented times. And the dot-com bubble and the 2008 financial crisis, they pale in comparison. And remember, after 2008, they created the biggest bubble in the history of the world. So what is ahead is we can't even imagine it at this point. But I wanted to point out, Dr. Paul, that printing all this money benefits some at the expense of everyone else. The money does not get evenly distributed because there would be no point in doing that. They do this because the few benefit at the expense of everyone else. And the ones that benefit are the ones that get the money first. They go out into the market, they spend at the current prices, and they drive up the prices. Those who do not get the money first get to watch prices rise around them. You know, and even if you factor in, oh, well, we got $1,200 checks, that's peanuts compared to what the politically connected got in this last money pump. Even Thomas Massie said, you know, you're getting ripped off majorly just for a $1,200 check, but it went through. And, you know, the politically connected will use this new money, go drive up prices. And this immoral system that we have will hurt the poor, those on fixed incomes. You know, you're going to watch prices rise. Your income is not going to rise along with it, and your standard of living will go down.
Economy, because there's a dependency on another fix, and another fix is another shot in the arm of money, and there is a favorable response and people feel a lot better. But it's also, if you keep doing this, in medicine, if you keep giving them their opioids, the patient dies. And that's what will happen here. If we can continue to do this, the real economy, that where there's true economic growth and a building of wealth in a country, rather than a waste of wealth and more debt, this will end. And right now, I don't think there's much chance of anybody in Washington that will suddenly wake up and say, you know, I think we need to cut back a little bit. I haven't heard Pelosi say that, but I haven't heard the Republicans say it either. So this is an opioid economy, and they're dependent on it. They feel better when they spend and print money. At the same time, when you look at some of the news, you know, there's a lot of rioting going on and demonstrations in the streets, and you say, well, that just has to do with police brutality, and it has to do with coronavirus. Well, the coronavirus is a bit of fiction there, and the people in the streets are also involved in economics. They're blaming freedom for the problems that we have faced, and people know that structurally this economy is in bad shape. So they have to blame somebody, and they're out on the streets, and yet unfortunately, they're not blaming the right things. They're not blaming big government and special interest government. And Chris, you point out so clearly that the special interests are benefiting from the new money they have over the years, and that's why there's a distortion. And that's why some people are richer and others are poorer, and it really creates class fighting and struggling. And the whole thing is, it's not only when they're trying to build an economy based on fiction, the fiction of money, but it's also when the bailouts come, which means they're going to exaggerate everything. The bailouts so clearly went to the wealthy, the people who benefited in the boom times after the housing bubble crashed, and they got bailed out, and yet the average person lost jobs and lost homes. And right now, many people can point out statistics where a lot of people never recovered from that. This idea that this image of this economy was perfect, you know, 2 months ago before the stock market crashed, it's not quite that way. There's structurally problems which produces enough unhappiness that there can be political divisions that will go to bat and go to the streets, and that's what's going on. So we see it. You know, Antifa is getting some criticism now. I think it deserves a lot more criticism because they do represent an entirely opposite direction than what we've been used to in America, because then there's the cultural Marxists and there's the economic Marxists, and they're both out there talking. The people are frightened, they're easily influenced. Just think how easy it was almost to turn the world upside down by fake stories about coronavirus. I mean, now they're admitting that that they have lied about it, but they were able to have a great influence on this and really lie about what was going on and deceive the people. And that means the problems are out there, and it will not be solved by essentially printing more money. But if you look back in the last 6 months or even less, that is historic increase in the money supply, historic increase in the benefits that government's promises, and people are trying to feel better, but those payments are actually, going to slow up or stop soon, and they're going to renew it. But, well, even today, like I said, Trump has asked for another $1 trillion to continue the bailouts, but that will, make people feel better for a little while. But the big thing is the money, the dollars, if you want to call them what it is, money or not, the Federal Reserve knows that they send to pacify the people. They can send them forever, but if they lose purchasing power, it won't matter. And the more you print and the more you send, the more they lose value. And that's what their people are facing. They're facing that today. So a lot of people are complaining, I don't have enough money for rent. And it's the landlord's fault, it's a businessman's fault. They're charging us too much. No, it isn't. It isn't a shortage of money. It's a shortage of value. So this is a big difference. If they think it's a shortage of dollars and Federal Reserve notes, yeah, then the answer is very simple. Do what they're doing, and look, it's wonderful. It works out. Yeah, but opium works out for a while, and people feel fixed and get a fix, and they think that'll be this problem. But it is very temporary, and one day soon, I think we're going to see the unraveling of this so-called recovery.
That's right, Dr. Paul. Unfortunately, it's not pretty when stuff like this unravels. So hopefully we can add some value to our viewers on how to prepare, what to at least anticipate what's ahead. And what's ahead is rising prices, as we're talking about. And those rising prices are going to make people angry. And they should want an end to the Fed, but we already know that that's probably not going to happen. They're going to blame businesses, blame another country, but whatever, they'll come up with something to blame. And because Americans are conditioned to go to government to solve problems, they're going to want government to do something about these rising prices. Now, the government should do nothing. But since the government will do something, they will most likely institute price controls, which will multiply the problems. Price controls always lead to shortages. So instead of having goods on the shelves at higher prices, market prices, we'll have price controls and empty shelves. So as long as people keep running to government to do something, fix these problems, government does not fix problems, it only multiplies them. That's what we're going to keep getting, just a multiplication of problems and rising anger.
This economy reminds me a little bit about what was going on the other side of the world during the late 1980s, because Japan was the kingpin. We were upset with Japan because they were buying up all our stuff and they were doing so well and they were stealing our secrets, and they went on. And their stocks skyrocketed. They were up at one time up to, I think, 39,000. And lo and behold, they said there was a belief that it would never crash because the corporations would share in buying up stock, and then the banks were buying the stock, and literally the government and their central bank were buying it. So this was going to last forever. Well, that thing that didn't last forever, it crashed. It hasn't even recovered now. It was 39,000 back then. Now it's still 22,000, and it's risen a bit in last year or so. But it takes a long time. It was artificial, and we're doing the same thing. We're of course creating a lot of new money, but we're also in the business of purchasing stocks and bonds, and the mortgage-backed bonds, and literally getting involved in the stock market. I think the highest priority of the Federal Reserve right now, unfortunately, is the propping up of the stock market. Because with that stock market going down, the emphasis then will be on the reality of what's happening on the streets and what's happening to the average consumer. And this way, there's a bit of distraction from that. But it is something that will be very, very serious, and the Fed will not be able to just say, well, we'll just buy more and more and more. Eventually, there's a collapse in value, and that is when people will really be getting upset with each other. And of course, there's way too much of that now already, and that's a bigger question asked, is why is there so much anger? And there's some pretty good explanation of that if you understand who initiates violence and who allows this to happen. Because if you go back to the origination of a lot of violence, it comes back to what governments do. They exist because they use violence. They use violence against us all the time. Violence violence to take our money and our kids and send them halfway around the world and fight wars that we don't need. Violence because we want to redistribute wealth and take from those who produced and those who haven't produced and have no respect for personal liberty. So there's a lot of violence, but it's orchestrated by government. But where did this government get the authority? Unfortunately, either they took it or the complacency of the people. They're promised free stuff and they go along with it. But I think we do live in revolutionary times. It will be resolved, and we have a desperate struggle to present our case for liberty rather than just assuming that we just need a stronger government. That's what's going on in the streets. Trying to identify exactly who's causing the trouble, whether it was government. If it is government and has been government, how can they be the solution? And yet that is generally the case, and I don't think any one party has the monopoly at all over what we should do, because there's not many strict constitutionalists there that said you can't do anything unless you have precise, permission to do it by the Constitution. They just go and do whatever they want, and on the short run, it feels like a good shot of opium, and they feel better about it. So we will see this play out, but it's going to be very dangerous. But for me, I still think that the solution is not that difficult if people are just ready to assume responsibility for themselves, accept their liberties along with their responsibilities, and lo and behold, the country and the individuals should be a lot wealthier, a lot freer, and hopefully a lot happier.
Right, Dr. Paul, I'll finish up by saying, it's easy to be a sunshine patriot, as Thomas Paine said, to stand up for liberty when the sun is out and everything is perfect. But it's when it's hard that it makes something of you to stand up for liberty. And there are many people, we see what goes on in the media, but the American spirit is out there. It just gets no media attention, because things are not as it seems in the mainstream. Propaganda is necessary for power. That's why you always see the same message, whether it's in school, whether it's in the movies or TV or professional sports, where corporations are all parroting the same line, because that's what's necessary for the artificial to keep going. But the American spirit is not artificial, and it requires no propaganda. It has no propaganda whatsoever. It just is. So all it needs is people to just speak about the ideas of liberty, and it'll take care of itself. And now is the time when it's tough to talk about what Dr. Paul mentioned: individual responsibility, free markets, voluntary interactions, not a gun pointed at your head, making sure you follow the line. And the foundation of it all, and that's why we cover it every single Friday just about, is sound money. Without sound money, you can't have a normal society. So that's what we have to strive for. Thank you.
Very good. There are a couple things in economics that are very, very helpful in having an economy that operates more efficiently, and one is the interest rates. If there's a market rate of interest, it gives a lot of information to savers and spenders and investors. But we don't have a market rate of interest. We don't even have interest, so to speak. It's down to zero, and they're talking about negative. So that's not a very good one. But another long-term indicator, probably one of the best for understanding pricing, is probably gold. The gold standard and gold money has worked for 6,000 years as a store of value and as a convenient way to get away from bartering and have an exchange, especially in the market economy. But you can go long periods of time where you don't have that advantage. Right now, we've gone a long time when we haven't had really market rates of interest, and that's why I think there's so much debt and so much malinvestment, and why the reason the government is so big. But prices of gold are also rigged, and that causes a little trouble too. Just think, since 1933 to 1971, we weren't even allowed to own gold, and the gold was fixed at a price of $35 an ounce. And it seems like a long time. Why didn't gold break out? Well, it took some time because, the adjustment for the depression and recession and low prices and all. But finally, it did break out, and the market took care of that. But even now, when you see days when gold is going up, central bankers know darn well there's a message there, because I've heard them express themselves about this, and they get frightened when they see gold going up. So if they have a chance when gold gets a little weak and they can knock it down, they do, and they have. And I think that's what's going on right now, even though there's some logical reasons why people, go to stocks on the short term and people will not buy gold on the short term. But long term, gold tells us a whole lot. And unfortunately, it's good information if you're living in a free economy, in a free market. The price of gold would be very, very important. It would tell you whether your government is printing too much money and distorting things and stealing from the people and having governments that we shouldn't be having. So it would be very, very valuable. And of course, we will not have a healthy, growing economy just by printing money and destroying interest rate. You have to have that information. It's sort of like having an economy, and I think, Chris, you mentioned earlier on about what's likely to have a wage and price control. Believe me, it is dramatic. And I remember in 1971 when it was put on this country, it undermined the economy just immediately. So you lose the benefit of that. But that is what the socialist, communist, fascist systems are all about. It's rigging prices for special interests. A lot of people get lulled to sleep because they say, well, we don't really want socialism. We just want a good relationship with business and government. I've heard that say to my face and say, Ron, you're too extreme now. You should have a very good relationship with big business and the government, which of course is corporatism. And corporatism, the special favoritism toward corporatism and inflationism for the banks, is very, very destructive. And most of the time, it expands rather than recedes automatically. So when you get into a crisis like this, you expand those benefits. That's why I don't expect that the more bailouts, all of a sudden is going to help the poor people. You may be able to help them for a month or two, and maybe it'll even calm the streets down for a little bit, but it is not the solution. The only thing that can solve these problems, if you want a market economy and the maximum amount of prosperity and the maximum amount of satisfaction by individuals, has to be through an economy based on personal liberty. We had a chance of that. We used it. We became a very, very wealthy nation. We became a nation with the largest middle class. We never rejected very well the foreign interventionism, and we've endorsed here since the last 70, 80 years the principle of welfareism and welfare redistribution, and that's why we're in this mess. So the other item that one could look at to see what kind of trouble we're having is debt. An individual, if they have $10,000 worth of debt and they have a good job, they don't get excited. But what if they have a $10 million deficit and debts that they have to pay? They all of a sudden get despondent, and they don't know what to do. They have to default. And we're at that point where we can't possibly work harder, pay more taxes, and pay down the deficit. Nobody even thinks about that. It just wouldn't work. But the debt will not be, we can't continue with the debt. We can't continue with it. It will default, and the usual way of doing it is not refusing to pay Social Security checks or something. They're going to always pay that. The default will be is you're going to see a day when you're getting your money, you're going to get the payments from the government, and what you're getting isn't going to buy very much. And believe me, there's a lot more people in this country that already are experiencing this, but their voices aren't heard, and it's not understood, because even those who are suffering, they don't say, well, it's the money that's losing value. They will say, well, so-and-so did this, the corporations are making too much money, and they'll have all kinds of excuses. So once again, I think we live in very dangerous times. I think the Federal Reserve is complicit in all that we do, and they'll keep pulling rabbits out of the hat. And some days you'll get a good day, and it looks like today the Fed gets pulled a big rabbit out. But eventually the people will discover they're just rabbits, and they're not anything to identify as liberty. We need more rabbits of liberty, and then I think we'll do much better. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.